When it came to looking for a guest for this week's episode of Here Comes Pod, the choice was, well, simple. The incomparable comedian Simon Greenall kindly agreed to join me to talk about his career. Whether it was appearing on the genius TV series I'm Alan Partridge as Geordie handyman Michael, to providing countless voiceovers, including everyone's favourite meerkat, Alexander Orlov, to his multiple stints writing and performing over the years, Simon has been a fixture on the British comedy scene for decades. We talk Coogan, Partridge, meerkats, and the secrets of creating great comedy. Enjoy. Hi Simon, welcome to the pod.
Thank you. Nice to be in the pod.
It's good to have you on board. I always like to start with a fun question. And so my question to you is this. If there was one show in the history of British comedy that you could have appeared on, which you didn't, and then you've been on some amazing ones, but if you had to pick one that you didn't appear on from whatever era, which one would you choose?
Oh, that's hard, isn't it? The Office in some ways, because The Office kind of knocked us for six because it was completely different and new, and we were in the second series. But no, I think to be in, I'd like to be in Count Arthur Strong. I think he's just brilliant. I think he's really funny. I know him, and I met him lots of times, but I've never been on his show. But God, I think it's funny.
Well, you've got a really strong pedigree in that regard, but you actually started out...
What, not being in people's shows? Yeah, I have. You're right. I've got a very long, successful career of not being in people's shows that I want to be in.
I may come back to that later on in the in the interview, but I wanted to start somewhere near the beginning, not immediately, but some way around the beginning, because you attended Manchester Polytechnic School of Theatre.
Yep.
Was comedy always your thing, or at that point were you looking at dramatic performance as well?
Well, I was lucky to get into the Manchester Polytechnic School of Theatre because it was the only place in the country that would take people without academic qualifications, and I think they only took 3 students a year who hadn't got any GCSEs or CSEs or whatever. And the thing was, and I never let on at the beginning, was I knew nothing about acting. So I'd have seen a play at school. I'd watched a lot of telly, but I'd never been in a play or anything like that. I'd never done anything like that because we didn't do it at our school because it was a secondary modern school. So we did sort of digging or sewing. So I'd never been in a play, and I kind of bluffed my way in. And I was a bit old. I was 25, so I was quite a bit older than the other students. So I think that was an advantage, that I had a bit of like what they call life experience. So yeah, it was complete bluff that I got in, and all the other students had done Amdram, they'd done theatre at the sixth form college and stuff like that, and I knew absolutely nothing. But yes, I always wanted to do comedy, but to begin with, we had to do serious drama. All I wanted to do at the beginning was survive. I wanted to not get kicked out.
But what inspired you to go down that route if it wasn't something that had been a big part of your life?
Well, as a child, I think I was 12. When I was 12, my sister, who was at Manchester Polytechnic, funnily enough, was doing the costumes for a season that they were doing at the Edinburgh Festival. This is in 1969. And they were doing Macbeth. And there's a child in Macbeth, Fleance. And my sister said, "Oh, my brother likes, showing off. He'll be in it, and he can stay with me for the time that it's on." So I was in a play in 1969 as a 12-year-old, but then never again. So that's what made me want to do it. But I'd completely given up on it because where I grew up, there was nothing like that at all. It was a very kind of rough Scottish borders, kind of bleak, remote place, and there was no theatre or anything like that. So I'd completely given up on it, and I left school at 15, worked for my dad, did lots of jobs and got fired from everything. I went traveling. I did Interrail. I lived rough in Greece for a bit. Ended up on a kibbutz in Israel, thinking I'd make enough money to get my plane fare back. It took me 10 months to save the money up, and then I thought, I don't think you can get fired from acting. So that's when I went to Manchester Poly School of Theatre.
Did you ever have a stint as a handyman or caretaker in a hotel?
No, but I could have done. My brother was. My brother was a handyman in a hotel.
And always acting. Did you ever try your hand at stand-up, for example?
In those days, it was equity. It was controlled by equity, and it was closed shop. So you had to have an equity card in order to work, certainly in theatre and television. But it was a catch-22 situation because you couldn't get an equity card without working in the first place, except that in Manchester, you could enter, well, not just in Manchester, but in Manchester, they had a very sympathetic man who ran the variety section of equity. So you could enter equity through variety. So if you did a variety show and you could get enough paid contracts or show a paid contract for, I think it was £30. If you had 4 or 5 paid contracts, you could then join equity via variety. So we were joining with jugglers and dog acts and all sorts of people like that. And we did student comedy. There's 4 of us. And we did student comedy around working men's clubs, sixth form colleges, like anywhere that would just forge a contract for us. We did a couple of working men's clubs, which was interesting because they were really kind. They were very kind. They'd say, right, there's some students coming on now. Don't throw anything. They're not getting paid. Well, they are, but not officially. So don't, and give them a chance. Give them a chance. It might be funny. You don't know. Here they are. You think, oh God, and on we'd come. But what it did give us was a tremendous kind of personal armor in that nothing ever scared us again, because nothing could ever be as scary as that was.
Also at the Manchester Poly School of Theatre was a young Steve Coogan, who was a couple of years below you, I think.
Yeah, he was 2 years below me. He was a first year, I was a third year. So he was my fag.
I can't imagine they had that system at Manchester
No, they didn't.
Poly.
We didn't have it. Yeah, we had our fag system was, can I have a fag? Yeah, he was 2 years below me. And yeah, we kind of knew that he was going to be something or other. He wasn't a great actor. He wanted to be, and he never sort of sat comfortably in the plays that I saw him in. He never quite sat comfortably in them. But his year was a really strange year, a very odd year of people. But yeah, he was clearly going to do something else and better and bigger. You wouldn't say he was part of a gang. He wasn't a loner, but he was a little bit aloof, a little bit self-assured.
And did that then prove to be the connection that led to you later on being on I'm Alan Partridge, playing Michael the Geordie handyman?
Well, what happened was, when we're all at college, Steve Coogan and myself and an actor called Pierce Quigley, who's in The Detectorists, and a couple of others, we had an item on a BBC radio show called The Buzz, which was for students. It was a student radio show, and we did bits of comedy on it. We learned a lot. We learned loads because we had a BBC studio to go and use when we recorded these comedy sketches, and some of them were quite good. And actually, Steve, because years later, Steve said to me, do you remember those sketches we did? And I said, actually, I don't know if you remember this, but you came up with a character called Dave Lippard, who was a broadcaster, but not a very good broadcaster. And he went, oh my God, I did, didn't I? I remember that. Yes, I did. And I could see in his mind, he was thinking, I'm going to go back to Patrick Marver and Amanda Iannucci, and I'm going to sue them. And I'm not going to be in court. I'm not going to be a witness for the defense. No. But you could see that he said there was a real click in his mind of like, oh God, yes, I did think of it. But what he came up with that Dave Lippard character was way too sophisticated for what we were doing. We were just doing sort of sub Monty Python stuff. But actually, and how it came about with me going up for I'm Alan Partridge was I was doing quite a bit of sketch appearing. I'd done Mel and Griff, and I'd been in Armstrong and Miller, and I got an audition for the character of Michael. With it being, and Amanda and Steve and Pete Bainham are fairly chaotic, and they'd had 2 years to write I'm Alan Partridge, and they'd come up with character names and I'm Alan Partridge, and he lives in a hotel, and that was about all they'd managed to come up with. And they said at the audition, they said, okay, your character's name is Michael. He works in the hotel. He gets on with Alan Partridge, and that's about it. Yeah. And then we had like 5 minutes to think about it, and then we had to do like an audition on tape with a very bored casting assistant sat there. But Steve didn't know I was coming up for it. I was auditioning for it, and I knew Steve would like the army thing, so I made him ex-army, and I sort of based him on my brother. And I made him. I was going to make him Yorkshire, because that day I'd done a Yorkshire. I'd done a voice like that for a commercial, you know. And I thought that'd be quite good, you know, if it's a big Yorkshire bastard like that, who, you know, didn't find anything funny. And I was going to do that, and at the very last minute, I thought I'll make him Geordie, because everybody says, "Oh, you know, nobody can do a Geordie." I thought I'll show him. I'll do a Geordie. So I did a Geordie, but when I first did him, he spoke like that. You know, he spoke quite normally and quite clearly in that. But it was Amanda's idea to make him unintelligible, which, of course, was the genius touch. But Steve didn't know that I was auditioning for it, and apparently they were watching the tapes back of people auditioning, and he saw me and but didn't say anything. He didn't say, "Oh, I know him." And Amanda said, "I like this guy here, but I think we could make him like a really over the top Geordie." And then Steve said, "Yeah, actually, I know him from college, and he's good." So that's how I got the job, because I met another actor who's now in Coronation Street, and he said he came up to me and he said when you auditioned for I'm Alan Partridge, was it your idea to be a Geordie? I said, yes, yeah, it was. And was it your idea to make him ex-army? I said, well, yeah, well, I suppose it was. He said, yeah, well, I went up for it as well, and I'm a Geordie. I used to be in the army. I said, well, it's pure, I'm sorry, mate, it's pure coincidence. And he had this kind of slight look in his eye of like, I don't know if I really believe you. But anyway, he's in Coronation Street now, so good luck to him.
He was the winner in the end. So what's the balance then between the writing and the performance, and what kind of contribution were you able to make in helping to define that character who is, you know,
a lot. We improvised a lot. We had big sort of, like, I suppose you'd call them devising sessions now, where we'd start the day, and Amanda would say, all right, Alan's coming back from his radio show, and his car's been vandalized, and he comes in and he's not very happy about it, and you try and help him. And let's start. Lynn, you should be in this as well, and let's have reception. And he comes up to reception, and you just be doing something, and then you take it from there. And we just spend hours and hours and hours improvising. And then Peter Bainham, who's brilliant. Peter Bainham he just thinks of the funniest thing. Peter Bainham would come up and he'd whisper something for you to say the next time, because you go back and do it again, and you'd say this line. It'd be just really funny, and so it was very kind of organic, as it were. But yeah, there's a lot of input.
So how much of you is in Michael?
Well, I'd like to think there's very little, but I didn't know. Yeah, there's probably loads. I don't know. There's a lot of Steve in Partridge. When we did the film, Declan Donnelly, the director, who's Irish and really funny, really nice, he came up to me and he said, you know, I think you're the only one here who's actually acting. I said, yeah, don't tell them. Because he said, you're the only one who's not just like your character. All the others are like their characters, aren't they? I said, yeah, well, they are kind of, yes. Trying to be as posh as I could. Yeah, of course.
So were accents and comic voices and impressions always part of your comedic repertoire from the beginning?
Yeah, well, it was part of my acting repertoire as well, because at college they'd say, oh, you need to build a character or create a character. And I would think, all right, I'll make him from Liverpool. And they go, no, you're just putting on a voice. And I would think, well, hang on, everybody else is dicking around with shoes and hair and limps and stuff like that. It's equally as valid for me to just choose for him to be from somewhere else in the country. And they go, no, you're just hiding behind a voice. And I still don't agree with it. I still think that it was my way of starting a character that I would think, and now if I'm working, I'll say, where do you want him from? And they go a little bit like, oh God, I don't know. Where do you think? I said, well, okay. Is he confident? Is he working class? Is he cheeky? Is he a scouse? What you choose? Just give me a steer, and we can take it from there. Because we can make him from Liverpool, but then it doesn't have to be thick. A lot of people from Liverpool are very clever. It doesn't. He has to be. He can be educated, or he can be as as broad as you like. So I would always start with the voice, but a lot of people don't like you starting with the voice.
And how did you get into voiceover work?
Well, I used to write commercials. When I left drama school, I had 2 kids at private school, which wasn't my idea, by the way. So I had to pay for that. So I did anything. I did anything that came along. And I'd written at college. And when my first acting job, I met an actor called Chris Lang, who now writes Unforgotten and The Canoe Man. He wrote that. So we were 2 young actors together, and he'd been in a comedy troupe called the Jockeys of Norfolk at Edinburgh when we were at Edinburgh as well. We were at Edinburgh doing street theatre and rubbish, and they were the that year's hit comedy group. And then we did this play together at Manchester Royal Exchange, and he said, I've got a commission to write for Mel and Griff, but I can't fulfill it. I can't do it. I can't do it. He said, should we do it together? And I said, yeah, I've got loads of sketches. So we started writing together, and we wrote for Mel and Griff for a long time. Then we wrote for Hale and Pace, and then we wrote for Jack D. And so because we worked for Mel and Griff, who had a company called Playback, which they had before Talkback, which was a radio production company, we used to write radio commercials. And I would write radio commercials, and I would say, I could do that. I could be in it. And they would never accept that you could cross between writing to being in it. It was this rarefied world of voiceover artists. And I thought, I can do that. I can definitely do that. I can definitely do that. And then I slowly started to get little bits of voice acting. And then I landed with an agent who was just brilliant and just really wanted me to, she kind of saw that I could do something and just made it happen. She just persuaded people to hire me.
So that, I suppose, leads us on to probably your most high profile voiceover work, which is as the voice of meerkats, Alexander Orlov and Sergey, in the Compare the Meerkat advertising campaign. What was the genesis of that campaign, and to what extent have you been able to contribute to its creative direction?
Well, when I look back on it now, when I look back at the audition, I feel physically sick because I was really quite arrogant and really quite kind of assertive. And I think how close I came to blowing it. How close I came to them going, yeah, thank you very much. Bye, you stuck up sod. Because they had quite a lot of stuff together. They had like smoking jackets, pictures of Terry Thomas, cigarette holders, Rolls Royces, mansions. They had all this kind of mood board stuff. Then they had a rough rendition of the meerkat, of the meerkat character. And they said, oh, he's louche, he's sophisticated, he's Russian. And they said the nearest we can think is kind of like he's like a Russian Alan Sugar, because he's a powerful businessman. He's a tough businessman. So we had a lot of this kind of, oh, so welcome to Compare the Market. I'm the big tough businessman guy, and I am in charge of my business. You're fired. This kind of stuff. And I said, I think because he's a meerkat and they do that kind of sitting up thing, I think he should have a higher voice. I think he should have a higher, more kind of animated voice. They said, no, it's not animation. It's not animation. It's not a cartoon. I said, yeah, but he's going to move. He's going to move like a meerkat, isn't he? So, God, and at any second they could have gone, this guy is just too much hard work. But they didn't. They stuck with me. And I said, maybe he's got a voice up here somewhere, which is kind of cute, And they were talking, and what they do is you do something, and then they switch it all off. They switch the mics off, and you can see them behind the glass discussing what you've done, but you can't influence it in any way. And you can see them making all these hand gestures like, oh God, and, gesturing, cutting their throats. And you think, oh, all right. So, and then they put you back on. You go, hang on, well, look. How about this? I think maybe And then I started making animal noises like, and they went, oh, that's good. And the animator, because the animators were there, they said, oh yeah, that's good. If he makes it, and I said, well, it's if he makes a noise at the end of the commercial, it's what's called a mnemonic hook, and kids love that kind of thing. They love a ping or a they love that. I said, if at the end of the commercial there's a noise that he makes, I said the kids will try and do it. I bet you the kids will try and do it. So I think that kind of clinched it for me. And they eventually came around to the idea of him being sort of a softer character, but more of a bit more flawed, a bit more. He's pompous rather than sort of powerful. And Sergey, who speaks like that, Sergey. Nobody's ever called me out for just doing Yoda. Sergey, who speaks like that. He was only ever supposed to be in one commercial and say 3 words, and I said, let's make him a bit nerdy. Let's make him a bit like that, a bit like stupid, because he works in computers, but Russian. So we ended up like this, and I said, it's only 3 words, isn't it? Because this is killing my voice. He said, oh yeah, he's only got to do. It's just computer not working. That's all he had to say. So I never thought any more of it. And then that commercial went out. And of course, everybody in IT went, that's us. We've got our own character at last. so then Sergey became a much more of a prominent character. So I was stuck with him. So I have to speak like that all the time. And it's really difficult. It just made me cough there. But I'll ruin my voice for that money.
And so where did you get the inspiration for the voices, both for that particular campaign and others?
Well, when I was growing up, my dad had an agricultural repair business and a garage, a car garage in the Scottish borders. And my dad kind of spotted that this would be a good place to have a garage because it was at the end of the motorway. The M6 was coming, and cars in those days were not built to spend that long going that fast, and they all broke down at the end of the motorway. And my dad fixed them. So anyway, this garage was a real kind of crossroads, and we had all sorts of people turning up with different accents. So we had Glaswegians from Glasgow Holiday. We had Geordies coming over the Lake District, but also our town was a settlement camp for refugees after the war. So we had lots of Ukrainians, Poles, Lithuanians. We had a couple of Russians as well, actually. Yeah. So all my friends that I grew up with were Ewald Milniak, Alfie Kulaszewski, Jan Bill, people. So they were all next generation Polish. So all their parents spoke Polish. So the town was the only other than border Scots, the main accent was Russian, was Polish.
You've worked on some of the defining comedy shows of the last 30 years, really. I mean, you mentioned Alas Smith and Jones, I should say. But there's Partridge, One Foot in the Grave, W1A, and many of the most lauded comedians, Steve Coogan, Armstrong and Miller, Harry Enfield, Al Murray. But having worked with so many of these talented comedians and performers of that generation, do you see any characteristics they all share? I mean, is there a fine line between comic genius and tragedy?
There's a fine line between comic genius and miserable git. I don't know what it is, but they're not I'm going to say they're not the happiest people. They're not I think it's because it's hard work, because it's difficult and hard, and it's a hell of a lot of responsibility. Then they're not laugh a minute, knockabout fun. Apart from Peter Kay. Peter Kay is always on and always funny and always just really ebullient. But then to the point where he drives production mad because he doesn't do the same thing twice. He doesn't concentrate. Well, he does concentrate, but he won't do it again and again and again, which is always the problem with comedians in movies, because a lot of comedians never made the transition to films very well because they wouldn't do the same thing again and again and again. It's just completely against their nature. It's not the clown. It's not the tragic clown. It's the single-mindedness. It's the drive of it. They have to have a tremendous self-confidence and belief. And it doesn't make them the easiest company, but they're not supposed to be. You can't say, he wasn't very nice. He didn't invite me around for dinner. Well, no, because he's actually shouldering a comedy show. It's not easy. There's a lot of responsibility.
And do you think comedy writers and performers are born or are they made?
Woo! Well, there's a lot of talk about funny bones, isn't there? Although I have seen people apply their cleverness to comedy because they are so clever. They can learn all the elements and hold them like a chess game, and then apply them. But they tend not to have silliness. They tend to have quite a methodical approach to comedy. They don't have sort of giggly silliness, which comes from the other side of spontaneous natural comedians, but who are then quite chaotic when it comes to creating or focusing or honing down. So you can come from two sides. I think you can apply your intelligence to learn comedy and learn all about it and learn how to do it, and then learn from the experience, or you just are naturally funny and silly and crazy and can be steered to creating a comedy show.
So I always like to end the interviews with my guests talking about their favorite things. And it was framed in the past as a lockdown media thing, but we're over lockdown, so that's gone. So I need a new framing device to ask my guests about their favorite film, book, music, and
doesn't
TV
get you
box set.
sued by Desert Island Discs.
Well, I always say that any similarity to any other formats is purely coincidental. So my question to you and my framing to you is this: if you found yourself stranded in a Travelodge, other hotel chains that may be catered to Partridge-like characters are available, which film, book, playlist, or album and TV box set would you want to have with you?
Woo! I recently read Gone with the Wind, which was absolutely amazing. I absolutely loved it. It was brilliant. Gone with the Wind would be the book. I'd like to watch Heimat again, which is good. Set in Germany from the First World War right up until the early 70s, late 60s, about one village. The Third Man is kind of my favorite film. I like Graham Greene.
Music choice?
I don't really know albums because I never really. My parents didn't let us have music, so I never really had albums and stuff.
Favorite playlist?
Smiths, Manchester at that time and stuff. I still like the Smiths, and actually a lot of young people like the Smiths. They've kind of stood the test of time.
TV box set?
Oh, blimey! I'd watch The Wire again. During lockdown, I was slightly tempted to watch Coronation Street from the beginning, just to get me through. Don't tell me what happens in the end. The Wire I'd watch again. Oh well, I'm slightly tempted to watch The Sopranos again because it is so good. It's so good.
Well, Simon Greenall, thank you so much for being a guest on the pod. It's been fascinating and a lot of fun.
Thank you.
It was it's great for you to share details of your life and fun to research. I didn't discover, as the Russians might say, any compromat, but I did. but we did get to compare the market, so it was
Thank
pretty
you.
close.
Simples.